Hello everyone, Leafreed here, and today I wanted to talk, just on my mind, was Star Wars. I mean, it's interesting from a certain facet how the movies and this franchise have transformed and how well loved they were when they first came out, and now how they're kind of, I don't know, it's just over. It just kind of seems in a bad position right now. But it's interesting to look back at the series as a whole, and it's kind of very obvious from a literary perspective what the very first movie was kind of based on, which was Dune. I don't know how much inspiration Lucas took from the novel, but Lucas did take. He said he watched a lot of other contemporary sci-fi things at the time. Some of Lucas's earlier works are actually kind of interesting, like THX 1097 or something. It's kind of a nifty kind of dystopian society kind of movie where there are no traces of goofy characters or spirituality. It's almost like a proper thriller, and I'd actually recommend it. It's not too bad. But the main inspiration for the original Star Wars: A New Hope is undoubtedly Dune, obviously, as a literary piece. You have this Western character who ends up on this fictional desert planet, and the spice from the refineries turn the Fremen and those who come in contact with the spice, that turns their eyes blue. So you have blue-eyed people in the desert. And then in Star Wars you have this blue-eyed boy who lives on a desert planet with two sons, and also finds out he's actually part of a long lineage of these great warriors. And just like Muad'Dib, Luke Skywalker is very much kind of in the same vibe, or a variation on that vibe or that theme. And so those are the main things that stand out to me. Well, actually, no, of course, I forgot. In Dune, there's also the Galactic Empire and the Emperor himself, who basically is one of the antagonists and is very quickly dethroned. Dune actually kind of feels like a sped up version of Star Wars 4 to 6 now that I think about it, which is kind of funny. But I kind of wanted what I wanted to say is that there aren't a lot of inspirations from Dune, but I think if we keep going with the character types and the role models, we might keep getting more and more. If there's a Han Solo, I don't know who that would be. I mean, there is definitely Gurney Halleck and Duncan Idaho, who are Luke's kind of teachers and guides. I don't know if they're comparable to an Obi-Wan. Maybe kind of. I mean, they're more sort of militant rather than a wise old mentor. And other characters, there is of course the love interest, who is from the Fremen tribe, which doesn't happen in Star Wars. It turns out to be his sister, which then gets dropped once he finds out it's his sister. Yeah, that's interesting actually. And the one thing that Dune does not have, though, that Lucas does definitely have, are comic relief and goofy characters. Yeah, I'm almost certain Dune did not have that. Dune is a very mostly serious novel. And the whole worms, that sort of aspect of this biological anomaly, this weird alien life form coexisting with humanoid or human-like creatures, is definitely something that Lucas has throughout all his films. But back to the goofiness, something that actually really prompted me to make this video is that people really seem to hate the prequel movies, and I mean, I don't. I grew up with them. I don't know if it'd be different. I was growing up with the new ones. I mean, I hate the new ones, but the main thing that it still gets hate to this day, and for a long time I just didn't get it, and I still don't really get it today, and I still see people talk about it. And the latest thing they were talking about is the overflowing or overwhelming hatred for characters like Jar Jar Binks. How this was the new Star Wars, the new trilogy, and it kind of got off on this wrong footing, and everyone universally hated this character. And I guess maybe at the time that was the vibe, but as a kid, I recognized Jar Jar was in the movie, but it wasn't his movie. If anything, it was really Qui-Gon's movie. It was about his nurturing of Anakin and trying to have faith, in this potentially flawed character that they knew was going to be extremely powerful and would be tempted to go the dark side. And Qui-Gon was like, you basically need to have faith in this guy. And so, really, Episode 1 is Qui-Gon's movie, but apparently all the hate is around the Jar Jar character. And it's funny because there have always been a Jar Jar character in all of Lucas's movies. If you watch Willow, I mean, it's definitely more so focused to that underdog, kind of Hobbit-esque stereotype and storyline. While if you have things like Howard the Duck, that's all of Lucas's goofy side. And of course, people kind of circle back to this main point, which is that with the prequel trilogy, Lucas had established himself so well at that point that for anyone to jump in during the production and say, hey, this might be a bit too much, that didn't happen. Until the end of, the screening of the first, episode, Lucas himself infamously said, I might have gone a bit far in some places. And it's really interesting to see that whole development, and also, how Jar Jar, was like this fully 3D character now was a big part of the production that I didn't really realize, because for me, as someone who enjoys those movies, he's a completely forgettable component. But what's so odd to me about, besides all of that, is people's treatment of the prequels as like bad. And the people who like the prequels, all the bad parts are just funny to me. Like it's okay to be not serious about it. It's okay for it to have this awful scene in an otherwise good movie, because the overall message of the franchise is still intact and still from Lucas's vision. And it really just blows me away that people had the gall to assume or propose that it would get better once it changed hands to Disney. In my honest opinion, I don't think I've ever seen a series change hands from one creative director to another and it hasn't suffered some kind of catastrophic loss, or at the very minimum a incredibly distinct tone shift, because it's such a personalized thing that, again, I kind of call it the golden goose or the golden author or whatever. Like, you don't look at the egg, you look at the person who made it. I really am a proprietor or supporter of authorship. When someone's name is attached to something, like American McGee's Alice, even though not the best game in the world, but it's still a decent game. It's important to recognize like how these creative things come from distinct people or distinct groups. Like Team Silent in the original Silent Hill series is like emphatically different than the other Silent Hills. It's definitely better, but it's also very different. And I don't know if, like, given all the resources in the world, if Konami could hire someone to make a proper Silent Hill game that is like Team Silent without just rehiring Team Silent. That's a completely different issue. But I think authorship is a huge, huge thing that I really advocate for. If someone made something and they go on to make something else, it's really important to kind of follow that line or that group or whatever. But I find it so interesting that I think what Jar Jar really represents, and that kind of backlash to these movies, is that it had been, the last movie came out 83, and so it had been roughly almost 20 years since that movie, and so people were kind of coming almost 20 years later with a more adult style mind to these movies, and they were kind of goofy. And in fact, these ones were more goofy and more silly and more ridiculous than the previous ones. And people gave that negative reviews, and Lucas's response to it is like, well, it is a movie for kids. And it's funny he said that because he's only half right. And because what it is, yes, it's a movie for kids, but it's a movie that has serious, timeless, endless themes that relate to kids and adults. It's something that kids can enjoy and also adults can enjoy. It's a universal film. If there's any such thing, it would be Star Wars. And it's so interesting to me that the vitriol for it, I think, comes from a place of the perception of identity and also hobbies. And so someone pointed out very, poetically that, the people who like Star Wars were kind of a little bit nerds, a little bit outcasts. Yes, it was mainstream, but it was also people who really, really loved it were also really weird, kind of, or on that nerdier spectrum. And because of that, they were usually social outcasts, and which compounded their adoration for this thing that they loved that they couldn't really describe or comprehend. But it was like a social movement where you fell in love with something, but you weren't allowed to tell people about it because normal society wasn't really on board with it, so you couldn't really talk about it openly. I remember what it was like even growing up, in the 90s. If you weren't into nerdier stuff, it was very verboten. It was very, oh no, don't talk to that guy, that's weird, or whatever. Oh, you have a weird interest, okay, whatever, you're the weird kid. That's how it was treated, and it must have been even worse in the 80s and I guess late 70s. And so the whole culmination of that is there are people who are very heavily invested with this piece of art and makes it part of their identity. And with the first 3 movies out of the way, I think they wanted to see the return of the next 3 movies kind of culminate in a recognition of their art form, that they can say, oh yes, this thing is back that I'm a fan of, and I can stand proudly and say I'm a fan of this. But when New Star Wars came out, it was a lot goofier, a lot more kid-friendly, and that felt like a betrayal, in a sense. And I find that really interesting because I can very much relate to this, but with a different IP, which is actually The Legend of Zelda. In the sense that from, Majora's Mask to Wind Waker, again, I was very much in love with this thing. I wanted to be kind of socially accepted. I wanted to be able to share it and show people and be proud of this thing that I like and explain it. But what ended up occurring was, and there was hype for it too, because after Majora's Mask, it was kind of this pseudo, it was 64-bit. It was still, a little bit abstract, but graphics were improving. Next-gen graphics were like really sort of hyper pseudo-realistic. We weren't quite there yet. And we wanted something more serious. Lord of the Rings was coming out at the time. We wanted something big, epic, mythical, right? And at Space World 2000 or 2001 or whatever, it had like this tech demo for the GameCube to show what the graphics could render. And it showed this insane, like mind-blowing video of Link and Ganon having a sword fight in full 3D HD. And people lost it. Like, it was exactly what we wanted. It was so cool, and like, yes, this is what we want. And the game that comes out after that tech demo is Wind Waker, where you play as Toon Link, and he's literally a little stubby cartoon guy, and he's on his little wacky adventure. And yeah, the disappointment was unreal. It was like, I wanted to be able to, I was so in love with the series, and I still am, but I was so more in love with it then that I wanted to fully immerse myself in this and have it be part of my social identity. And when Wind Waker came out, I just couldn't do that because it just wasn't what I wanted, and it's not what I could show to other people. And it's very ironic because Wind Waker became my second favorite Zelda game of all time. Despite its cartoony, graphics and everything, the actual story, the cadence, the actual finale is pretty badass, and it's something in which the story surpasses the medium that it's expressed by. But I did feel that feeling of almost betrayal, or almost like, well, this is the next thing, I have to like it. And it turned out I actually did end up liking it a lot, but at first I didn't think so. And so I can see that from a Star Wars fan's perspective, they don't want to be associated publicly. It's like if some people can enjoy certain things like, I don't know, Undertale, but they don't want anything to do with the fandom or let anyone know they've played Undertale because it's going to attract crazy people. But yeah, no, it's interesting because the social aspects of art and how they relate to identity is really interesting. And now it's so ubiquitous that we have so many Marvel movies that is a whole, like, it's almost like to be a normie or like mainstream is not to, and to like Marvel is not two separate things. It's one and the same. That if you like Marvel, you're just a normal, average, Joe basically. And they've made it palatable, or they've allowed it to be palatable. It's really weird how throughout, growing up throughout history, certain things, certain pieces of art and entertainment have been allowed to be socially acceptable or pushed to be socially acceptable, and some have not. And just interesting that those that have been pushed to be acceptable are usually the most boring and banal, frankly. But yeah, so there's a social aspect. But back to Star Wars medium proper, what was the original driving force, and why was it such a big phenomenon? Well, I mean, the main message of the whole series is hope. And as I've discussed in my other pieces of, literature and books and games, like, hope is the most interesting and beneficial message I think you can expound upon and play with. There's very much, the whole Christian religion is based on that kind of hope, that sort of universal hope. And along with all these pieces of media, it's all based on a faith and hope. And people, said that Star Wars is just space wizards and in World War II space or whatever, which is like a crude, encapsulation. But yes, absolutely. And it's kind of almost like an atheistic kind of spirituality. It was spirituality without religion. I mean, technically the Jedi were the religion, I guess, and the church, so to speak. But I think, the main message was about hope. And what I personally love about the original trilogy is to see Luke Skywalker's progression. I think it's funny his original name was Starkiller, because his progression is, getting more powerful, obviously, but that, of course, leads him to the dark side. And so, you have this movement where he has all this power. He's aggregated the ability to destroy his enemies. And the thing is, does he give into that temptation to, destroy, and into vengeance and hatred and revenge, and those giant themes of, forgiveness. I mean, the way the original trilogy ends is amazing. And by the way, Return of the Jedi is my favorite movie, because you see this kid who's like become this adult, who's transformed into this character who is so completely different. He's like so much character development, so much, through struggle and through training and through revelation, and he's been able to become this character who is able to defeat the big bad Darth Vader, his father, the kind of ultimate mythological endpoint of one's journey, and destroy the Empire. And he refuses to do so, and because he lays down his weapon, so he won't lose his soul, essentially. And that is in which, the Emperor is trying to kill him, and he has hope and faith still in his father, that Anakin ends up throwing the Emperor off the side of the Death Star into the shaft or whatever. And it's that hope that saves them in the end. It's that hope and that faith, and that's the main message, that overcomes the darkness, that no one is beyond redemption. And that's a super, super spiritual belief, and a super spiritual message, to redeem the most irredeemable person in the galaxy. That's what Star Wars is about, to find the light in all the darkness, even when the Empire's in control, even when everything's against you, to still have that spark of rebellion and hope and that fire within you to go forward. And I think it's a beautiful, amazingly well-told story. And on that point, the other literary theme I should have mentioned earlier is, this is an interesting point, but who was constantly at the Skywalker Ranch with George Lucas, helping him, along, I'm not sure, or helping him and studying with him, was Joseph Campbell. I don't know if anyone knows this, but yeah, like according to Wikipedia, Joseph Campbell studied or roomed or came over and visited Lucas, and they basically kind of brainstormed. And Joseph Campbell is kind of the godfather of modern myth in the effect of studying its structure. And so Campbell's kind of work was to go around from Native American to, well, every culture. I won't list them all, but every culture's myths, creation myths, heroes myths, all the stories of that culture that were being kind of, are only recorded, written down, some of them in the last 100 or 200 years, compiling all of those and trying to find the patterns and themes between them. What he really did is produce this diagram called the hero's journey. And so he boiled down the hero's journey to 12 more or less steps in which a person goes through a struggle and kind of, has a proper myth or proper story. Like, what is the structure of the best story ever, let's say? And if you look at all the foundation myths or foundational stories and mythologies, they all have more or less the same pattern. There's nothing that is going to guarantee that it's a success, but you can at least identify the main things that allow it to, the base components, like the base requirements, if you will. And so, of course, I already covered that, but to reiterate them here, it's, there's the call to action, the refusal, then, he's forced into it or he decides back against it. And of course, I forgot, establishing the world, there comes first. And so then there's, the guardian, or the guide rather, who helps them, traverse, so they have help now. There's the guardians and the passing of the threshold into the new world. Then you have a series of trials and tribulations. Then you have the journey to the underworld, in which at the end of there is the revelation and defeat. And then you have the rebirth and comeback, the sort of the final showdown, and then the return of the boon or the object which makes everything in the universe easier, reward that you bring back to the original world from where you started. And so that whole cycle is the hero's journey, and that's what he produced. And he was producing that while or during he was at Skywalker Ranch. So the fact that these two guys knew each other and were producing this stuff is not a coincidence. So when I look at Star Wars, why was it popular? And I think someone put it, very succinctly, that it's science fiction that was about the fiction more than the science. It's like, yes, okay, we have spaceships and space warfare and aliens and whatever, but the details of how, like, let's say there's a race of aliens and they only communicate using smell, and also, they always take holidays on, every half Monday or something. Like, who cares? It's like a lot of science fiction, at least I think someone said up until that point in the documentary about Star Wars, it was all about, like, the details of these creatures. Like, what if there was a race of aliens and they did this? And it's like, well, what if they did? Like, who cares? And so what Lucas brought essentially is he brought a story that could have been, in Middle Earth fantasy. It could have been, prehistoric fantasy. It could have been, normal day, but he decided to put it in a highly creative setting of science fiction. But the fiction part was rooted in such a hardcore, rock solid, mythological understanding of what makes a good story and what makes a good hero's journey, that you don't spend time explaining what is a Jedi, what is a stormtrooper, what is a blaster. You see it and you understand. You tacitly understand it without having someone explain it and do the nerdy thing. Well, you see, they actually communicate using their spell, and actually, no one cares. And so Lucas got to the point, he figured it out, that you just have a really interesting, well done spiritual story with a great theme, and you do it in a creative setting because he has that creative ability, but the main train for that story to happen is the story. It's the mythology that's important. You could have done this story in any other setting, in any other climate, any other kind of fantasy genre, steampunk, I don't know, but he decided to do it in science fiction. And so that's why it's this eternal story. Because if you peel back all of the sort of, face value identifications and values on Star Wars, you would cover a myth, basically. And that's what makes it such a powerful and very strong IP. And the fact that Lucas bought all the marketing rights so he could sell his toy franchise as well, and also have complete control over his IP. I think that's huge. And as someone said from that documentary, Lucas was from a era where Hollywood kind of had its heyday in the 50s, and by the 60s and 70s, they wanted the avant-garde. They wanted the artist to come into Hollywood and kind of, not just be a corporate giant production, but to have people like fresh blood. And Lucas apparently, I guess, was kind of the last of that kind, where it kind of revitalized the industry and turned it into a thriving market again. And then it became corporatized, and now we are where we are now, where everything seems to be driven by one kind of ideology, one kind of stereotype, one kind of genre, one idea of diversity, and not a diversity of diversity, if you can even call it that. And I feel like I don't know, it was like 2015 or something, I thought if Hollywood doesn't make anything decent in like the next 10 years, they're done. And they haven't. And so I think it intentionally needs to crash and burn and allow the bar to be lowered for actual artistic vision to enter into the market, and outside of Netflix or whatever. And just on that point, a really interesting interview. I'll try to find it and link it, but it was a really quick 5 to 10 minute interview, and I forget the guy's name, but he was an ex-Hollywood screenplay writer, and so he was retired, so he could fully talk about this. What was the issue? And what he said, I just never would have considered. He said the problem with stories in Hollywood today is that they lack any form of spirituality. And it's kind of like, oh, and everything's based on material. Everything's based on power. It doesn't matter if you're good or evil. There's no good or evil. It's all gray. And there is no sense of justice. It's just who has the power, who has the justice that is manufactured. And there's no morality. There is no the hero saves the day. There's just people fighting over money or scraps or whatever. And that in itself can be a compelling, form of entertainment, but it's the message and the spiritual nature of stories that, in these, ancient books that echo these kinds of ideas long after they've transpired. And so he was basically saying, there's nothing transcendent in stories about stuff, but there is something transcendent about stories about people and about souls. And just the general vibe I get from anyone who watches anything on Netflix nowadays is that it just makes you feel bad after you watch it. Like, it's almost like fast food. It's good at first, it's exciting, and then afterwards you just feel bad about it, which is really bizarre, because I remember this fully came into my mind when I was watching. I didn't realize there was a sequel to Bill and Ted. There was Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey, and I watched that with a friend, and it is such a feel-good movie. I didn't realize how good a movie can actually make you feel after watching it, and that's one of those movies. It's really, really nice. And it's amazing, again, what a good story, what a good experience can do for your mental health, or for just for entertainment's sake. But yeah, and Star Wars is kind of the core of that mixture of mythology and science fiction that makes it such a pillar, I think, of Western media. At least, that's what it used to be. But yeah, and just on the form of Jar Jar Binks, and Lucas has always had, again, the goofiness in his movies. In the original trilogy, it was R2-D2 and C-3PO. These were these little robots that would beep and boop and go side to side. But they were a small part of the movie, right? And The Empire Strikes Back, you had Yoda, who's like, I actually forgot that Yoda, when he first meets Luke, is this total, I guess, silly guy who's like rummaging around and eating his food and not like taking him seriously at all until he reveals he's actually a Jedi Master. I think that's so funny. And then in Return of the Jedi, it's the Ewoks, and it's funny how they get progressively longer and progressively goofier with all these scenes that Lucas is doing. And it really shocked me when I rewatched Return of the Jedi a couple of years ago how much screen time the Ewoks take up. Like, I remember there's the whole Jabba's Palace thing. That's a huge section. And then, yeah, you have the Endor, segment, and then you have the final Death Star and the final fight. But, like, the Ewoks took up a lot of time. Like, a lot of time. And it's funny how I just erased that from my mind. I didn't remember any of that, but when you actually are sitting there watching, you're like, oh, wow, this is a lot. And I think a lot of people just don't remember that because it's forgettable. It's just kind of filler. It's like Lucas doing his goofy thing. And that's exactly how I feel about, the prequels. Like, yes, Jar Jar is in there, and he's forgettable. I mean, he's annoying, but again, we went through the whole social, psychological reasons why people felt betrayed by that character. The other thing that I just need to bring up, because it just bothers me to no end, is that when you ask, like original trilogy people, what's wrong with the prequels, like, they actually hate them. Like, it's actual hatred. And there's a whole industry on YouTube of people making money complaining about Star Wars and why it's bad, and trying to explain it, essentially, and expunge the core concepts of the elements that make it bad. And because the prequel people who understand where the prequels fail, it's funny to them. And it really got me thinking at one point that, like, the prequels do have an overarching, interesting political narrative. And I remember as a kid watching those things, I hated them. Like, I really did hate them. But I appreciated them more as an adult because I realized, oh, this is the whole build-up for the betrayal and the end of democracy and turning the Republic into an empire. It's like, okay, I see what's going on here. And I appreciate it more because of that. But if you're not able to think about those scenes, you're not able to, understand it. And because you don't understand it, you hate it. But even if you understand it and you see how cheesy it is, you can at least laugh at it. And it reminds me of the line actually from Don Quixote, which is that wherever there is intelligence, there is wit and humor, and thusly the inversion lack thereof. And it just makes me think that on some level, yeah, the original trilogy people have a point, but at another level, I feel like some of them are honestly just dumb. I think some of them look at the prequels, fail to understand the political. Like, if you experience movies as like a pure form of entertainment, a pure form of emotional response, and you can't think about what you're engaging with, then you have like a lobotomized child viewpoint on it, then I can understand why you would hate it so much. Because it's not fun to watch and experience, and it's such a weird thing in general, because outside of Star Wars, there are people that are like that, where, they ask, well, what did you think of this movie? Well, it was entertaining. All forms of art need to be at least somewhat entertaining. When the Iliad was written, yes, it was a while ago, but if it was written in a very dry, boring way that you couldn't even read it, then, that would make it something that isn't experienced, and then if people didn't experience it, it wouldn't become art. And there's always an element of entertainment and art intertwined. And the things that I see really catch on and get really popular are things that are highly entertaining, that are very novel, but also have a very deep and, resonating message. You need to have those components where essentially, at some point, all art was entertainment. every play about Faust or Shakespeare, people went to go see that for fun. That's a distraction. And we think of it as stuffy and old, now, because we have new entertainment. But, it's weird to think that the entertainment that we're experiencing now might have the potential to become a classic in the next, in our lifetimes, that's 40, 50, 100 years. And I think by definition, if there is a piece of entertainment or a piece of art or media that is still talked about and expounded upon decades, years after it comes out, then by definition it is a classic. And there is some conflict between academia where they decide what is talked about, what it should be discussed and expounded upon until we fully exhaust our intellectual powers on extracting the aspect of the human condition that is trying to be explained by this form. And, I think it was Aristotle who said, art imitates life, or life imitates art. And that is either one. Either that, one is an expression of the other. And even when there are stories or movies or whatever that are sometimes fake, completely fictitious and made up, they have more bearing and resonance with us on a human level than if it was true. A perfect example, again, Don Quixote, where they're debating which books to burn, which have influenced, him to become this crazy knight. And so, they say, well, we should only burn the non-fictional books versus the fictional books. So the non-fiction, those are real events, and those are inspiring him to do these things. And so it's no, it's the knights of gallantry and errantry, these fairy tales that are influencing him. But they said, well, why would those influence him more if they were just made up? Well, how could these fantasy things have more power than the real conquests of these other Spanish conquistadors, for example? And it's really interesting that in a very basic way, this was very summarized very pointedly on South Park, where they had the 3-part episode of Imagination Land, where the characters inside one's imagination are somehow more real or hold more value to a person rather than real life people, because an imaginary person or event can be flawless in a way, and the way it's reflected and represented in our minds is more pure in that sense. And that's why, again, the power of belief and hope and whatever, and however you want to whatever medium you want to use to encapsulate or express that hope or that purpose throughout your life is something that you can control and shape. I mean, as we've seen in Umineko and other books. But yeah, Star Wars is a great series. It's a really exceptionally well made. I mean, Lucas's alien designs, weapon designs. I mean, they are kind of repurposed World War II weapons and whatever, but he got really creative. The starship designs, the actual just designs of everything are all very impressive. The story of the characters is something that just outlives its generation, to the point where someone says, I need to show you this. That makes it a classic in that sense. And I think people will go on to study exactly what exactly happened with the franchise. I mean, I think people kind of said that Lucas was very dismayed by the fact that people hated the prequels, that they really hated episode 1, that they kind of dogpiled on him. And it was kind of like a slow kind of reception where people slowly warmed up to him, I think, after the fact. But at that point, he kind of said, to hell with it. And eventually he sold it off to Disney. And, for the record, I thought, okay, Disney's gonna change hands to the corporate whatever giant. Disney is gonna slowly kill this beast, but at least they're gonna milk it before it does. I am shocked at the speed with which Disney has guillotined the greatest canon in contemporary Western society. It is astounding. Besides Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, and The Matrix, I can't think of many more massive IPs that are iconic and identified with America or the West, besides, like brain dead action movies like The Fast and Furious, or some other kind of action movie. While Japan has God, like Neon Genesis, and I won't even bother listing them off. But what Disney has done is, it's almost impressive, I would say. At this point, I just can't. I have to applaud them almost with how negligent and how destructively quick, like a whirlwind, that Lucas got that bag, got that money, and immediately Disney just tarnished the whole thing. And for anyone who has a general sense, it's not real Star Wars to me. It's funny, I've had conversations on both sides of the spectrum. I've had conversations with people who, and this is the other thing about the original trilogy people, when I talk to them, I feel like a lot of their opinions might just be regurgitated from YouTube, because I'll challenge them on some of their points and they won't have a response for it. They'll just repeat. I don't know, I'd love to have a real conversation with someone on this at some time. But I feel it's mostly a subconscious emotional thing that we're never going to get past it, so it's like, whatever. So I've had one person tell me, oh, well, they messed up because they put midichlorians in the prequels, and it's supposed to be like anyone can use the Force. And it's like, well, yeah, they can, it's like, in this one case, it's like one indicator of Force usage, and that's like, it's not something that ruins the whole thing for me. It's like, there's just like a one-off thing with the chosen one, like don't worry about it. And again, there's this whole industry of people analyzing Star Wars and combing over Star Wars, and I don't know, I just feel like a lot of the criticisms flying around the internet in general, outside of Star Wars, people who criticize, politics, don't even get me started, people just regurgitate things. They'll just say whatever. They'll just repeat whatever. And it really makes me wonder about online discourse and where it's possible to find, not where it's possible to find conversations, but how much of online discourse is from people who are not critically thinking. And I feel like, I don't know, it's a very strange thing to talk about, how aware and awake someone is, and how much of their own mind is really their own or some YouTuber's opinion. And it's just interesting to me that you can find people that have opinions that let me know immediately to not interact with them. And one of those opinions, for me, is if you think Star Wars Episode 8 is a good movie. Oh, jeez. So we've come full circle with my turn to dunk on the movies I really don't like. When Episode 7 came out, I was kind of like, yeah, that's Episode 4. You re-released the same movie, but with slightly different characters. I think the only thing that good came out of the Disney trilogy was Kylo Ren. I thought he was a flawed, if not short-lived character who shouldn't have died at the end. The whole... Oh my god, the whole... And the other thing that the sequels, the Disney trilogy gave us, was Mark Hamill just roasting his own movies for a good half decade. It's really funny to see him in interviews and be like, don't watch this, don't do it, don't go watch the movie. You can, but I don't need the money. He's really funny. He warned us many times. In fact, there's compilation videos, but it's interesting to me how, with all the vitriol around the Star Wars franchise, that people don't even bother critiquing. They do bother critiquing, the Disney trilogy, but it's almost not worth critiquing because everyone just knows it's bad. There's nothing to get upset about almost. But for me, there is. So I'm going to talk about it. But yeah, you know, at episode 7, it's like, that was the same. Like that, it wasn't even, I don't know, there's people who rewatch the same movie over and over and over again. They said, "Oh, a movie came out in theaters, and I went to the theater like 3 or 4 times." And that to me is bizarre. I don't know what to say about that. Usually, I can see a movie once or play a game once. I really hate replaying, rereading, or rewatching something because I feel like I got, you know, the best or most pure experience there, and I hate retreading old ground because usually when I go into something and I know what's going to happen, it's predictable, I don't enjoy it. And that's true with, you know, multiplayer games or single player games. If I know what's going to happen, I don't care. I need something new, something fresh, something to add onto that perspective that I already have. But anyway, let me just talk about Star Wars Episode 8 here for a second, guys. In my entire life, there's probably a good 0.5% to 1% of my brain that was dedicated to hating Star Wars Episode 8. It is honestly my trigger. When someone brings it up, I just go into a mode. And you're getting that mode right now, because as I was saying, there was the other side of the spectrum. So I've had someone defend or attack the prequels, and I've had someone defend the sequels, Disney trilogy. And I think at the time Episode 7 would come out, and he said something, and I said, "Oh, I didn't really like it, and I think it's kind of bad." And he said, "Oh, you don't want Star Wars for a new generation? You don't want them to remake the movies?" I'm like, "Yeah, no, I don't need you to remake the same movie every 20 years." Like, does that need to be said? It just, and again, it's one of those borrowed YouTube opinions. I don't know what to call it. It's when, you know, you have a conversation or argument with someone and their opinions are just not constructed on their own but borrowed from someone else. It's very dystopian, the times we live in, but perhaps has always been like this. And I just knew that the whole dialogue around this IP, so much of it is just prescribed. That's the word. Prescribed ideas. And that is why anyone who ever said that this movie was good, Episode 8, is just, I'm sorry. You can exist over there, away from me, but I'm not taking you seriously. I'm not at all. And the reason for that is, when I went to go see Episode 8, my brother invited me. I reluctantly went, and I saw it in theaters. And I remember distinctly laughing in the middle of the movie and just saying that's absolute BS. And then leaving the theater laughing, being like, was that a joke? What was that a joke? Disney? Were you pulling my leg? You're having a silly time. I'm sorry, I'm just fully internalizing. Alright, I've done enough ruminating. Let's just dive into it. What's really interesting is one analysis I saw of it online where everything in Episode 8 is actually anti-Star Wars, where the entire movie is entirely against the main concepts of the original movies. It's not just it's a bad Star Wars movie, it's an anti-Star Wars movie. And that is the best way I've ever heard it put, and I thank you for that video. And what makes it an anti-Star Wars movie is that it's anti-hope, anti-character design, anti-cohesive narrative, anti, meritocratic, anti. I mean, things still blow up, but it is basically everything about Star Wars in the reverse. And so let's kind of go through that. So first of all, there's this whole aspect about, about hope, for example. So the anti-hope narrative. So, Luke Skywalker, he basically is living on this rock, and because he raised Kylo Ren, who was too powerful, he feared him and then tried to kill him. And then when Kylo realized that, he rose up against him and sent him to the dark side, which is just, all right, I don't think so. But okay, you can say that. And it just, Luke's character in this is completely wrong. Everything about him is off. Everything is weird. The very fact that he, I like to think it's poetic that he drinks green milk from weird space alien tits. And in the original trilogy, he drank blue milk. This is the weird Luke Skywalker. This is the anti-Luke Skywalker. And everything about him is just, he's hopeless. He's just hopeless. And even Mark Hamill was like, the original Star Wars was about a kid who never gave up hope. The whole rebellion was built on hope. And here's the heart of that trilogy being totally hopeless. And I'm just going to list my complaints because I can't, I'll just, get caught up in my emotions. So, Luke Skywalker, that is the embodiment of hope. Basically, he trains Rey, and Rey is basically this character who basically she does nothing wrong. And those kinds of characters, basically you have to give them a Superman complex. If your character is just good at everything, then you have to give them some kind of conflict. They have to either fail to defend someone or fail to reach their goal fast enough that, yes, they're really strong, but they're not strong enough. Otherwise, if you're Superman, there's no conflict, unless you have some very complex thing where, it's out of his control. And that's Rey's main problem. And Rey's the main character somehow, and I say somehow because she doesn't feel like the main character at all. She feels like another one of the side characters, and she's just on this journey along with Finn and the rest, and Poe and the rest of them. What do I hate about this movie? Warp speed diving. The Princess Leia scene, Captain Holdo as a whole, I think that's her name. Luke's end, and the way, and so Luke dies in this movie. Apparently, he uses all of his Force energy to appear before Kylo Ren to bait him, so that it gives the rebellion enough time to get away. And it takes place on an ice planet, but no, it's not an ice planet, because one of the soldiers, they have a specific scene where the guy takes his finger and licks, the white stuff on the ground, and he says, salt. So it's not an ice planet, it's a salt planet, totally different. I swear to God, it drives me insane how there's like, yeah, we're gonna do these old movies from like the crappy 70s and 80s, but like just do them your own way. That's basically it felt like what Disney said to the director. And apparently Disney did interfere a lot, so it probably just made the whole thing worse. I don't know. But in any case, so Captain Holdo, this whole side thing where you have this Okay, so first of all, you have the rebellion, and just ever since the start of the movie, this bothered the piss out of me. Because how can you have a rebellion when you are the Order? Like, you are the Order. They call it the First Order. It's like, no, the First Order is the rebellion, because they're trying to reclaim the Empire. You are the prevailing power system. And then even in episode 7, oh my God, this movie's so angry. It's a Death Star breaking and shoot 5 beams and destroy 5 planets. Oh no. And I don't think Coruscant gets blown up, but like, it's like, who's in charge? Who's in charge here? So, sorry, they're not called the Rebellion, they're called the Resistance. Oh, excuse me. So, like, someone just like, it feels like an AU. It actually does feel like an AU, and the whole thing with, Han, not, embracing Chewie and Leia, and just, oh my God. It feels like an AU, and appropriately this goes because it's by a completely different person, completely different directors, completely different property management, intellectual property management. It's so lazy and so bad, and so everything they do is awful. So Captain Holdo, she's this purple-haired, like, what do they say? Don't date your movie unless you want it to be dated. If we had a guy in Star Wars who had a bowler cap and a fast-talking attitude, and he said, hey there, buddy, we might think this was shot in the 1930s, but no, it's shot in like the 2010s, and so there's a character with purple hair that's done in just a way that doesn't look like other characters wear their hair like that. She just looks like some person from the modern day who stumbled onto the set of Star Wars, besides her wardrobe. That's the issue. That's the first issue. On top of that, they have this whole thing where, oh my god, and the whole, god, like, it's amazing how bad this movie is. It's amazing how many bad layers there are to this sandwich. They're like, yeah, let's put the peanut butter on top of the pastrami. That'll work. So the whole movie is that they're being chased, but like in like light speed or in normal speed or something or whatever, and they're being chased through space, but they can't warp drive, and so because it's broken, they're also chasing them, but the Empire can't catch up to them, because if they warp drive, they might overshoot them. And so the whole movie is just a slow chase through space, basically. And the entire time, the captain is like, I have a plan. You can trust me. And Poe asks, what is this plan? Because, we would like to know so we don't have to worry. And she says, I'm not going to tell you. And later she says, oh, well, there was a spy on board, so I couldn't tell anyone. You couldn't tell your top-ranking guys something? Or you could at least tell them some other story, but you just said, I'm not telling you what my plan is. You just have to trust me, bro. And so appropriately, Poe is like, this isn't working, this isn't helping, and so he tries to do his own thing, which ends up, getting mucked up, and then he comes back to her and says, oh, well, you caused trouble, and because you went out of line. Like, this is a movie, okay? People are supposed to do things. People are supposed to, they're in a desperate situation. If they get captured, the resistance or whatever it's called is over. And you're gonna risk everything on a trust me, bro, in case there's a spy on board that, oh my god. The whole thing is really, really dumb. And so then at the end of that, to like vindicate this character, she does a warp drive suicide thing, where she takes the one ship after everyone evacuates, turns it around, and then does a warp drive into our Imperial Armada, which for some reason makes a cone effect, which destroys a dozen Star Destroyers. And it's like, where was the precedent for this? Now, here's the thing. They could have solved this super easily. They could have said, I'm going to do a rescue maneuver. This has a 1 in 100, 1 in 1,000% chance of actually working, to actually do a suicide run into these, enemy ships. But they never explain that this is super hard to do. They just said, oh yeah, you can do this, but no one has ever done it. If this was the case that you could destroy, like, it's one thing to destroy one Star Destroyer, but to destroy like 12 or a dozen of them, or like more, by doing one suicide warp drive, kind of breaks the consistency of the lore. That at any other point, this is the only tactic you would use. You would just install warp drives into automated drone ships and just do it. Like, the conclusion of this scene is asinine and changes the entire lore of the universe. That why wasn't everyone doing this all along? It's like bringing a bazooka to a sword fight and then wondering, I wonder why, where did the bazooka come from? Oh god, it's so stupid. And then that's her arc. And aside from that, now we have the Leia story. So there's this one scene where Princess Leia, I'll just say it, like, there's this missile that's coming towards the bridge and their shields fail and it hits the bridge, and Leia is, she's this old lady now, and she, it hits the bridge and she gets sucked out into space. I'm like, okay. And at first I thought, and they have her like floating in space, and I thought, okay, this is a good way to actually end that character, to have her kind of sacrifice for the resistance, and kind of have her like locked out in space, even though apparently your body would crush and freeze in the cold vacuum. But this is Star Wars, so we don't have to be exact. And I thought, this is nice. We're having a scene here where we look at Carrie Fisher's dead body floating through space, and the scene just keeps going and it keeps focusing in on her. I'm like, okay, yep. And then it shows like the skin flakes on her body start like shifting. I'm like, it kind of looks like she's like waking up, but that's not possible. Maybe she's being like grabbed by some tractor beam or something and being beamed up by like a search and rescue crew, or the Empire is going to preserve her body or something. And then her eyes open. I said, okay. And then she reaches out her hand and she flies magically back to the ship. People have called this the Mary Poppins scene, and I concur with that. And people will say, oh, well, what, there's space wizards, but you can't believe someone flying through the cold vacuum of space without any suit whatsoever after they've been hit by a missile and are just kind of semi-immortal. Yeah, I find that kind of ridiculous and hard to believe, along with this warp drive thing. Like there are certain limitations that you have to take in consideration. If Princess Leia can survive in the vacuum of space, intense cold, intense pressure, intense getting hit by a missile, she's basically Superman. She's basically indestructible, kind of like Rey. There's a lot of Superman tropes in this movie, and she flies back, and it's not like, oh, I'm so, she was exhausted, but she's like, it's not like she's maimed or harmed. She's like, oh, I'm totally fine, good bros. Like, this is asinine. This is what a boomer thinks what Star Wars actually is, without actually watching it. Except boomers probably did watch Star Wars, so it is so insane as a scene to watch that I burst out laughing in theaters. I have never burst out laughing, even to like a normal funny film, let alone a serious film, in a theater ever. But that is the one time it did it. It is the most ridiculous scene you've ever seen. It feels like you're being trolled, like someone is pulling a joke. Like, this is not happening. This is stupid. That was the moment where I realized, like, it's over. Like, it's absolutely emphatically over. I thought maybe they would have a couple boring movies and drag this out. No, it ended right there. The Leia scene killed Star Wars. Any hope for Disney Star Wars for being good for me, like, just gone. Like, from that point on, it was a joke. It was like, you're an absolute joke. If we can have Leia flying through the deep vacuum of space, why don't we have Luke Skywalker, disassemble his arms and make clones of himself, and also use a Borderlands style rocket launcher comes out of his side and his arms can turn into machine guns. Why don't we have that? I should have thought of that. I should have put that in the movie. So there's that, and then, oh my god, it just keeps going. And the other, like, every scene in this movie I could call the worst scene of all time, and it just keeps going. And the next one is with Force Ghost Yoda and Luke, where Luke is like trying to, how Luke gets his hope back is the dumbest thing, where basically he goes to the old temple or whatever, I forget, on Yavin or somewhere, where they have the ancient Jedi texts. You never see them. Well, you do kind of see them. And Luke's like, oh, we need to look at the text to rediscover the Force. And then what happens is, someone wrote this. Force Ghost Yoda shows up, goes to Luke and says, don't worry about it, and sends down a strike of Force lightning onto this little hut and burns all the Jedi texts. And Yoda's like, we don't need the past. We don't need history. All the teachings of the Jedi we have are here. So Yoda is a book burner. Never thought I'd say that. And he basically tells Luke to not dwell on the past. In fact, you have to kill the past, which I think Kylo at some point says. So this whole thing about destroying history, destroying the past, destroying tradition, and just doing it now, doing it like currently, bro, is super weird to me. I think it's part of the Insidious part of maybe Rian Johnson's other movies, where like in Knives Out, roughly, there's this house that's inherited, and the inheritor dies, and it's a murder mystery, right? and basically he plays this little joke, but then actually dies. And the whole thing is that his house is then bequeathed to like his housekeeper instead of all the squabbling, rich kids that are looking out for a handout basically. And but it's the same kind of theme of like, oh, look at this ancestral home going to just literally this whoever person. And so there's this whole like hatred of the past and this whole hatred of tradition, and it just like the current thing is now, and now says to kill all past things. A kind of a very, revolutionary sentiment, but without a point. It's like kill the past because LOL. And that's all it takes, for Luke to see the text burn, to be like, okay, without any past, I can just do it now, do it my own way. And the future's now. But you don't have to like destroy the past to do that. It wasn't like he was dwelling on it for like forever. Anyway, and the whole montage with Luke like going across the island, getting the breast milk, the green milk, and then these little like Ewok things, and the porgs. Oh man, that was like a psychic attack. I forgot about porgs. So this is the cherry on top. This is the cherry we get, where they have these little like furry bird-like things. It's a cross between like a bird and maybe like a hamster or something. And this was like their big marketing play. They're like, everyone's gonna love the porgs. They're gonna be like the Minions basically, but in Star Wars. Everyone's gonna love them. They're gonna be screaming in the Millennium Falcon. Oh, did I ever mention the Millennium Falcon back in all these movies? Remember the Millennium Falcon? Remember that like thing that George Lucas will make a hamburger themed spaceship? I don't know. It's back, guys. Is it different? Is it like the Ebon Hawk from like Knights of the? No, it's the exact same ship. Okay, great, good. Anyway, the porgs. Now you've really done it. Now you've done it. Oh, now I'm agitated now. So the porgs were like their big marketing thing. There's cute little furry things that go squawk and whatever. And I remember there were people like, oh, may the porg be with you. And people got tattoos of porgs on their calves or arms. And there was porgs being part of like the whole marketing, which was the most mismanaged, short-lived fad that I almost forgot about it. I don't think of porgs anymore. But porg mania, porg city. It's fine to make something cute, but then to force it painfully is. It's like Minions. It's yeah. So we have the Minions of the Star Wars universe, and then oh my god. And the next worst scene of all time is Snoke. Yeah. So Snoke was kind of teased to be the big bad, the new kind of emperor-esque figure who's actually leading the First Order. And he just like dies. Yeah, he's like there, and he's like one of the head guys, and then Kylo Ren kills him and betrays him when he finds out Rey's his sister or something. He's Ben Solo's. No, he's not a sister. Whatever, it doesn't matter. And he just gets cut in half, and it's like, well, that character's over. He didn't really mean anything or do anything or contribute anything or whatever. And yeah, great. That scene where Rey and Kylo fight together is actually kind of cool. I mean, honestly, the whole arc of, oh god, I remember the other we're seeing where what's her face, Rey tries to force communicate, as Luke instructs her to, with Kylo, because he's also force sensitive and they're related somehow, and she basically sees him shirtless, and basically like a Skype call, like, oh, sorry, I didn't realize you were just coming out of the shower. And they had this very awkward scene, and so if you ever wonder what Adam Driver looked like shirtless, you now can see that, not in any of the rom-coms he's in, but in Star Wars. So And yeah, I think that the only redeemable point of this entire like Disney franchise is Kylo Ren trying to have a romance slash relationship slash like a brotherly connection with Rey, and to see if Rey can redeem him, or even better, turn Rey to the dark side. That would be a cool twist, but you know, they're not creative enough for that. And yeah. And then finally it ends with, again, you know, Luke kind of baits Kylo Ren. And, oh, I forgot. I forgot about Rose. Oh, I forgot about Rose. Oh, I forgot about Rose. Did you forget about Rose? I forgot about Rose. Let me remind you of Rose. Rose is this wonderful, you know, can-do, like fighter pilot or something who's like on the ship, and they escape the ship with Finn, I think, and they go on this other adventure to try and save, you know, the ship. People harp on and say it's a really big issue. The only biggest issue I have with the side quest, it reveals to me how few alien races there are in this series with interesting designs. A lot of these alien designs and honestly ship designs, I mean, all the ship designs are just recycled from the original trilogy. They're not even touched the prequels. And but even the alien races, they're just humanoids with different colored skin. It's like super lazy, and you kind of feel the absence of Lucas's creative design, where at least, you know, even if the aliens were obnoxious and CG, God forbid, at least they were, you know, looked different and interesting. I think I saw one interesting creature the entire time in the entire trilogy, and I think it was in the third movie where they're on that ice planet and they have to decode this memory or something thing, and they have this tiny little guy. He was kind of nice, but like the designs are just not interesting at all. But anyway, Rose, and they go to this casino planet, and there's again, you know, a bunch of aliens and people there, and their casino is like, okay, whatever, and that amounts to nothing. But the real issue with Rose is the scene in the final fight, where basically they're surrounded on a salt planet, not Hoth, by AT-AT walkers. Again, not Hoth, but a salt planet whose name I don't care to remember. And they basically like, oh, we're surrounded, they're bombarding us, we need to buy time. And so they decide to go on a suicide run, and it's really, I guess, weird to me, because they have these weird like bilateral speeder things, and they have no guns on them, so they're just racing towards the enemy to die, to buy time before the fleet can again leave. I guess they're all trying to leave, but they just can't leave because they're all so slow. It doesn't make sense that the Empire would also have like artillery and stuff in orbit, but it's just all on the ground. Whatever, it doesn't matter. And so they go on the suicide run, and Rose, basically who has been adventuring with Finn, makes up her mind that she's, well, what happens is Finn, he's driving towards the thing, and there's this beam charging, and it looks like he's not going to get out of it, he's going to die. And I thought, oh, this is actually like a heroic end to like this character. I actually might like this character more because there's something interesting about him now, that he gave his life to rebellion. Even in the face of danger, he went for it. And as he's about to make his sacrifice, Rose, who's in the other speeder next to him, flies into him and blows him off course, and then they both crash, and the beam goes past them and hits, you know, behind them. And Finn is like, why did you do that? I was going to sacrifice. This is the whole point. We got on these speeders to go and save the rebellion or the resistance. Like, why did you know, stop me from doing from what we set out to do? And she said something like, we don't win by killing what we love, but by saving what we love. And then she kisses him in a passionate romantic scene, as the thing they love the most, presumably Princess Leia and the rest of the Resistance, is literally blown up behind them in the background by the AT-AT walkers. It's wow. It's like, how do you make such a tonally stupid scene Like, like, you have a character that's making a noble sacrifice. This girl who has the hots for him says no, pushes him out of the way so he can deny him his purpose and their purpose, and says she's going to save him while they're surrounded by the Empire troops and they're blowing up their base. Just the stupidity of this character drives people angry. I don't think there's a Rhodes fan on the planet that is genuine or a bot. This is like war trauma almost. Like, just every scene is just. There's another scene where they drop bombs in the beginning, and it's kind of like, well, you know, I understand there is non-gravity inside the pod, but once they drop through, it's kind of like the gravity should like catch the bomb, so to speak, but they just drop normally like there's air. It doesn't matter. It's a small detail in this storm of inconsistencies and problems. What was Rey doing during this movie? I don't even remember, honestly. Oh yeah, she's training with Luke, of course. Oh, there's also Captain Phasma. That was a character they tried to be like, oh, it's a tall female stormtrooper, played by or storm commander or whatever, played by the lady who's the tall lady in Game of Thrones. Like, oh, that's really cool. I would have loved to know it was her. I had no idea because I never saw her face, and because that character always gets, arrested or controlled, and they only have like 5 lines of dialogue throughout the entire series, and I wish I cared, The best scene of the highlight of this entire movie is probably like 7, where you had the fight between Finn and the stormtrooper who calls him traitor because he used to be a stormtrooper, and he has this cool electro staff thing that can take the lightsaber basically, and they have this big long epic fight, and then Han Solo just comes and shoots them and ruins the whole thing. But the way he spins it's really cool. But that was like the highlight, honestly, of the whole Disney sequel, sadly. Oh yeah, that's another thing. They just keep introducing force powers in this, this whole series. They're introducing new mechanics, like the whole warp drive suicide thing, and the fact that Princess Leia can survive the force immortality, basically. And in the beginning of 7, there was actually a cool one that was actually super useful, where Kylo Ren was actually able to block and stop a blaster bullet, a laser blaster bullet, mid-air, and keep it there until it dissipated after a while. And that was a really cool move, and they never really used it again. That could have been his signature move, besides the stupid cross guards that do nothing. And they just didn't. It was like a one-off thing. It's so stupid. There's so many one-off powers that no one considers, okay, if this is possible, what is the consequences if they had to fight people? And this is a huge thing, because Order 66, what happened to all the Jedi is that they all got overwhelmed by blaster fire. If there was a force power that was able to stop blaster fire, that's actually a really cool new mechanic. It'd be great if you didn't use it in one scene as a throwaway thing and reintroduce it as the big reason why you can't mess with this guy, because even the stormtroopers can't kill him, even if there were hundreds of them. See, when I start writing a better ideas or better script for this movie, that it's in trouble. And then in the third movie, we have Force Healing, where Rey heals this snake thing, and that leads them coincidentally to the exact place. Oh my god. So while 8 has a bunch of inconsistencies and just stupid themes and messages overall, and by the way, I just finish off how 8 ends, which is basically Luke appears as a Force ghost, and by using the last of his power to project as a Force ghost, he ends up dying, and the sound of his robes falling after he disappears is the funniest scene unintentionally that I think I've seen in a while. He just disappears. He just peace, and just dies, and his robes just fall to the ground, and especially this big epic moment. But the sound of that scene just being filled with the sound of his robe just falling down like a stock sound effect was the unintentionally funniest scene to me in the whole movie. Besides the Princess Leia's one, that was like horrifically, tragically funny. And so Luke dies by baiting Kylo Ren, and they all blast him with all the blaster fire, and then Kylo goes down and fights him for like a whole like big segment. He says, "Wait a second, it's a Force ghost." Kind of would make sense that if you were Force sensitive, you could tell that was like a projection. Doesn't matter. He's stupid. Doesn't matter. And so then finally, that gives the resistance enough time to escape and go away. It's like, yay. And then Rey uses this power where she's able to lift a bunch of rocks, and that's amazing for some reason because she's not good at everything immediately the first try, and immediately she does it, doesn't matter. And then finally we come to episode 9, which is like, finally, we're at the end of this dumpster fire. I mean, 8 was really the big one, and so 9, there were just some scenes where it's like, that is a big coincidence. It's a movie of coincidences. Lando makes an appearance. Hey, remember Lando? He's back. This whole movie's like, hey there, fellow kids. Remember me? Isn't like Boba Fett alive in this one or something? Was Boba Fett in this movie? Oh my god. Or his son? I don't want to think. I know there's the Book of Boba Fett. That's something else, but. So Lando's back, but yeah, no, as I was saying, Rey, they're looking for some Sith artifact. They're on Tatooine or some other like desert planet that's very similar. There's a speeder chase. It's all right actually, and then, fucking God, just give me a good scene, please. I'm begging you. I'm just like, this is a torture, and it's a litmus test again for people who cannot tell quality on their own. They need to be fed opinions about what they see on screen. There's a whole scene where like Chewie gets arrested. He's going off after the speeder scene, and he's going off in a thing, and it gets struck by force lightning by these Sith guys or whatever. And he's like, "Oh my God, Chewie's dead!" And literally, it's not. It's like, and of course, it's gonna be a thing like, "Oh, maybe he's dead." No, but it was off screen, so it's like he's obviously gonna be alive. How long until we know Chewie's alive? About 1 minute. He's literally like, "Oh, Chewie's alive." So you just had fake drama for nothing, for like a small amount of time. It wasn't like a big thing. We could have had him come back later in the movie and have this big, like, kick open the door and like, do his Chewbacca yell, and like they just like squandered it, just like for no reason. And then on top of that, they're going through this cavern system, and they're looking for, again, this Sith artifact that they have no idea where it is in the galaxy, or they know it's on this planet, I think, because Rey was like kidnapped and she's trying to find her past, and she was sold from people, and turns out that this guy that sold them to his parents, they find his little thing, and just so happens that after the speeder chase to this random place on this giant desert planet, that they find a snake that Rey uses force healing because the snake might be good, and then that leads them coincidentally to the ship of the guy who sold her to her parents or whatever all those years ago. And man, and just by coincidence they find this artifact that leads them to the final like revelation, whatever. And this is like the thing where, like, I don't know how you can defend this, but this thing that geolocates them to this thing, it goes to this one planet, but then they're looking around, they can't find it. It's this little knife thing, and when you fold it out and you're standing in this random spot, that it lines up with the edges of the wreckage of the Death Star. That there's nothing that told them to go through that exact spot and to look at the exact wreckage, which, by the way, is being hit by tidal waves and looks like it'll be like flooded and torn apart in the next like year or so. But by having that exact ancient artifact made to find this exact place, an exact geography that is highly dynamic and changing, is the most asinine thing I think I've ever seen. It's stupid. It's like Indiana Jones finding an object that is, I know, shaped like the entrance to the Taj Mahal, and he's sent to go look for it in China. I don't know. It's like, how stupid do you think your audience is? How dumb do you think we are? That's what I kept thinking. Like, how dumb do you think we are? Like, let's check. Do you think this is plausible? No. Like, no one. Everyone looks at the scene and says, this is dumb. This is like really, really, really dumb. And so even episode 9 still giving us some bangers to just hook on here. Again, I think the most interesting alien design might have been like that orange lady at the beginning who yells Han Solo. I don't remember what her name is. Maz. I don't know. Like, that's the one thing I remember from the series. And then, oh my god, there's this scene in 9 where they have to, like, again, kill the past. They have to decode this thing, but in decoding it, C-3PO will lose all of his memories. And it's a big thing. Do we do this? C-3PO will lose all his memories. But then it turns out it's backed up, and it's like, okay, well, you have to kill the past. And so they have this big emotional scene. C-3PO stands there, all his memories are wiped, and he doesn't remember any of them. And his whole life is over. And then he reboots. He's like, oh, hello, how are you? He forgets Anakin. And he's like the one through line throughout the whole series that Anakin made him, and now he's here. And then immediately after that scene, just like Chewbacca, it turns out like R2-D2 stored all the memories and then restored it to him anyway or something. So, again, that was fake drama. And then finally, we're brought to this scene. Somehow, Palpatine returned. I don't know what the opposite or the complement to an Deus Ex Machina is, but it would be this. When the characters, they don't show, they tell. They tell you that the Palpatine return. Remember that guy, the entire point of the original trilogy, that Darth Vader overcame his own darkness and his hope and his faith and destroyed the dark person who had a control over him his entire life and threw him down a 180-mile shaft into the main core reactor of the Death Star and then was then blown up. Well, in this universe, if Princess Leia can survive the deep vacuum of space and complete thermonuclear explosion and incineration and negative 274 degree Kelvin, then so can the Emperor, apparently. And so the Emperor returns on this dark planet where he has a whole fleet of Empire ships standing by, Star Destroyers, and he's just chilling out, man. And he's back. He's just back. And so it turns out that Rey is his daughter or granddaughter. And that's why she was sold off to these guys on this desert planet so he could get rid of the evidence or something. Doesn't matter. And so Palpatine at some point had a daughter and disowned her, and now she's coming back, and they have a final fight, and shocker, she wins. And in the process, Kylo Ren also is there, and I forget like his conflict. It's more interesting where he's like debating whose side he's going to be on, but I think they team up and take him on together by just deflecting his lightning back at him. Great. And then Kylo is like mortally wounded from the fight, and in the same movie, Rey displayed that she had this special thing called, force healing. It'd be really great if, we could use that. It's not like you have a force power per scene, guys. Like you can keep using the same power or the same lightsaber, the same thing, multiple scenes. But no, she's just like, oh, I don't have it. And she they have this kiss and then he dies. And I kind of thought it would be this cool ending where, to redeem Rey for all of her blandness throughout this entire series, she would transfer all of her force energy into Kylo to save him, and he would become the next Skywalker who was redeemed through her sacrifice, and for that he would go on to fight oppression and the remnants of the Empire throughout the rest of his life, and restore his faith in Luke and himself and the galaxy. But now he just dies, and Rey's like, it's too bad, I guess. It's too bad, I guess. And yeah. And then it ends with Rey on the Tatooine overlooking the dual suns, like in every Star Wars movie at the end of the third movie. And I think that's how it ends. I don't really remember. Oh, and I just forgot the other scene that I really enjoyed was the giant triceratop animals they had that were going along the Star Destroyer. Usually when you attack a Star Destroyer, you might want to like bomb it or something, but they have like these like native style attacking, style where they ride these giant triceratops on the Star Destroyer in front of the giant cannons and ride them into, the wave of battle, because hey, that's cool, man. Stuff is happening. Oh, I forgot, BB-88 is in this movie. He's like the ball robot. I actually kind of like his design. Could have been something, but yeah, and kind of ends with Rey realizing she's a Palpatine and gonna have to carry that weight and that power for the rest of her life and kind of conceal her power. I don't think she starts a Jedi Order or something. I'm not sure, but so would you just write, if there's any AU fiction that's written, just pretend Kylo's like the guy, he's still alive. Like, he's the only interesting character in this whole series, frankly, and the only fun one, frankly, because of how angry he gets. And again, even Kylo's armor is like discount Darth Vader, discount Luke Skywalker, discount X-Wing, discount Aliens, discount. Everything is a derivative discount version of the original trilogy, and it's just so ungodly pathetic. Even the First Order is just like, what do you want me to feel here? You're not in charge. You're just angry. Like the main ginger they got to play as the main general or whatever is just the guy who screams all the time, and he's just a guy who's almost there for comic relief. And there's a lot of comic relief in this movie. Not the George Lucas style where there's like a goofy character, but the guy's like, "Oh, are you done talking? Oh, let me interrupt you. Oh, I'm so funny." But yeah, I think overall that is the sequel trilogy, and that really that took a lot out of me, and that's where Star Wars kind of died, really. And then after those movies, they had a series of spin-off movies, really Netflix series that are like impressively bad, impressively boring. The Book of Boba Fett. That one about the lesbians. Oh, The Acolyte. Yeah, those exist and are supremely boring. And I could go into the nuances of those, but it's almost fun to. It's only fun to watch if you're really drunk. Like the bar is low, like super super low now, and it's just like Disney has completely tarnished this franchise. They've completely killed it. They haven't even made it successful or profitable, which is shocking. Disney just exists to kill its own IP now. It's very strange, frankly. Even shows like The Mandalorian, like extremely mid. Like there's a guy who's a Mandalorian. I think he's the Mandalorian because the real Mandalorian lore, if you actually care, is done really well. I think Knights of the Old Republic, where they said there's only one Mandalore at one time. He's the leader of a tribe. All the other tribes, come to him. The Mandalorians lost a giant war with the Jedi. Now they're minority. Now they work as bounty hunters, and one of the Mandalorians, Jango Fett, became the clone, by which all the clones are produced. The specimen essentially, and. Yeah, the Mandalorian, like you have, this big tough guy and this baby Yoda, this Grogu, and it's fine, like it's watchable, and compared to the other stuff, it's better, but it's still not like I wouldn't recommend it. People say it's so good, yeah, for for current Star Wars, yeah, but compared to old Star Wars, it's like mid at best. The Clone Wars is probably better, which I never really watched. I watched a bit of it, actually. I actually really like the Genndy Tartakovsky Clone Wars. Like the original animations that were like... It was weird, actually. I'm not sure if anyone remembers this, but when they first aired, they only aired like... I think the first episode was like only a minute of animation. Like, it's this big hype thing on TV, like, get ready for this Star Wars themed animation, as like a minute long. It was a bunch of like cruisers and like destroyers going at each other. It was really well done, but it was a minute, and then it just cut and went to the next program. It was really weird and crazy. And I love Genndy Tartakovsky. I love Samurai Jack, and I love all the other stuff he works on. But the Clone Wars animated series, but mostly the Clone Wars TV show that initially came out, that was really well done. How Grievous essentially captured Palpatine, the clone troopers, and the clone commandos, and how they went into these desolate zones. The amount of tension and action. Gendy's really good at that kind of stuff. He's really good at that kind of scenes where it's not just action, but it's building the tension, which becomes action, and then the action is really, really good. And besides that, I guess other Star Wars IP is obviously the games. Knights of the Republic, fantastically, amazingly written series. BioWare, I would say their writing was stronger than even before they went to Mass Effect. Republic Commando, Jedi Outcast with Kyle Katarn, one of the best. I would say, AU's proper. I'd rather take Kyle Katarn's story over what we got with Disney, because apparently Disney is now the canon. Kyle Katarn's really good. And I guess by extension, Dark Forces as a Doom clone is actually pretty decent. And then there's a few lesser ones like Rogue Squadron, Rogue Leader 2. Star Wars: The Clone Wars is okay. The game, I mean. There's another Star Wars IP I'm definitely missing. Oh, Bounty Hunter, that's actually pretty decent. It's kind of fun. But Jedi Outcast 2, that had a really fun multiplayer. But yeah, there's plenty of Star Wars IP. The Star Wars Jedi, or the Jedi Survivor series with the ginger guy, I forget his name. Those are good. I just don't like them, and I wanted to like them, and it's really weird that I didn't. It's like, this is Dark Souls-ish, and it's kind of fun. It's kind of an action game. I just never, I played it, I had it, and I got past the first level, the first area, put in maybe 5 or so hours, and I just dropped it. I don't know, I wanted to like it, but I guess I wasn't into it. But yeah, the amount of books, novels, games, everything that's sprung forth from Star Wars is really amazing as an IP, and to have that completely destroyed by Disney is unfortunate, I guess. And for people to say, well, this is real Star Wars when it's absolute trash, is quite something. How many people they can convince or pay online to say that, or their bots. The Book of Boba Fett is really amazing, specifically because of this one chase scene, this speeder scene where they're going about 20 miles an hour, maybe 15, and it's high stakes, let me tell you. But Star Wars just finds itself now, I mean, with Rogue One even, it's just this malaise of mediocrity, just mid-content here and there. And what's really interesting, again, is to see the social aspects, where while I can look at the original trilogy and see the old people who, the old guard who love it for what it is, and maybe hate the prequels because it's too politically narrative, or more intellectually complex onto what's going on. There's a funny rant actually about Alex Jones ranting about the Star Wars prequels and how and how they are. With the prequels, there's so many prequel memes. There's also original trilogy memes. But most of the memes I see are from the prequels, just because maybe those people grew up with the internet, and they were really funny. They're still being used today, which is crazy to me. And in fact, if you're ever wondering if something is good or not, see if you can quote from it. I can quote, the George Lucas Star Wars way more than I can the Disney Star Wars. I don't remember anything except "Kill the past," or "I will finish what you started," or whatever. I mean, that's it basically. And again, with the prequel people, you have, again, meme culture. With the original trilogy people, you have kind of the original fan, the sci-fi nerd. And with the new trilogy, it's I guess mainstream, but in a female way. I see Baby Yoda, I see Grogu way more than I anticipate. There was this woman who was walking down the street, and she had her two favorite things on her shirt, Baby Yoda and the word Versace. Of course. But, even on The View, I see Whoopi Goldberg, and over Whoopi Goldberg's shoulder is a giant baby Yoda. I don't know what's happened or what this marketing or merchandising thing is, but Baby Yoda is the most strangely profitable and normie-fied thing I've ever seen. It's like it's on the same tier as like the Minions. Like they're just, except more popular. He's just everywhere. Baby Yoda is everywhere, and that kind of sums up how I feel about the sequel trilogy. It's Baby Yoda. Baby Yoda. Anyway, so from Dune to Disney, from Dune to Doom, that is how I feel about Star Wars, and I guess a close interpretation of it. And yeah, I know Disney, I said from the beginning, they're not working. I mean, George Lucas, he gave them, here's a script for episode 7. He says, there can't be episode 7, but if you do, here's a script. They threw it out. They spat in his face. He called them white slavers. They moved on. They didn't have Joseph Campbell. They weren't consulting mythologists. They were just doing their own contemporary thing, and this is the result. So if you take any away from this video, it's that, mythologies and stories and the structure of how to tell something is not based in the contemporary narcissistic rewriting of a current construct or system to suit your current viewpoints and goals and to propagandize people in believing what you believe, but going deep, removing yourself from the art and finding something that is truly transcendent, that is based on the structure of mythological storytelling, and tell something that is a universal truth about the human condition and not just chill out. But yeah, that's pretty much it. See you later, guys, and may the force be with you.